Hi, everybody. Grab a coffee and sit back. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you how I created these 4 Christmas-themed mini composition books using napkins. I'm going to be making the Christmas memory ornament version of it, but you could do this on a 4x4 or 5x5 canvas, on an iCad, or any substrate you choose. Here's a picture of the Christmas memory ornaments that I created last year. If you click on the eye in the top right hand corner, you can see how I created those versions. These are the mini composition books that I have. They are sewn and I got them at the dollar store, but they are available in Amazon and I'll put a link to that. If you're interested in the Christmas digital pack that includes this project and a Christmas activity calendar, you can shop Ninnysnapkins. You can also get all the napkins that I am using at Ninnysnapkins. I've made a template here, and what I'm doing is with this window, I'm deciding if I'm going to use this napkin, if it's going to fit this project. This one is called Frosty Hug. This is a Barney Cocktail napkin. This one, while I don't use this one, I love it, but it doesn't fit. It's a little too large, but I'm going to come back and use this to make a Christmas card for sure. You've got to match the size of your focal image to your substrate. This one's called Love, Peace, Hope, I think. And this is the full-size napkin, and it will fit, but there's also the pocket tissue version of it, and that fits perfectly. So I'm going to use this one. This one is Kevin Penguin. He is so incredibly adorable. It's a cocktail napkin, and I could put him both ways. So once you decide which ones you want to cut apart the napkin. Now here I'm cutting the 4 apart, and then I'm removing the 2-ply excess papers. Now when I'm making these for a craft fair, we'll come back to that. This one, I'm removing the napkin, the extra ply first. Now the pocket ones, I'm not sure if that's for all the pocket tissues, but it only had 1 ply. So you're going to want to check that out. Because I'm making these for a craft fair, I'm kind of doing this assembly line. That saves time. Once they're all cut apart, I am water cutting around the image. I'm using a liner brush and water, and I'm just ever so slowly cutting out the excess. You can use the repositional glue technique, and I'll put a link to that video where I show that. Because I'm doing a lot of the same things, I don't show every single napkin at every stage. And while I had about an hour and a half of video, in reality, all 4 of these took me about 4 hours. Now I'm just grabbing the sentiment that I'm putting on this Christmas Memories label, and I want to make sure that I have room on it. I cut out copy paper. Now my copy paper is 24 pounds, so it's a little heavier than some. And I cut a back and a front that's going to fit on the front and back of the composition book. And I cut those papers out, and then I am simply going to glue down the napkin using my fluid matte medium. The thing here I would gesso all of these first. I do gesso in a bit, but I would do that now. That would give a little bit more strength to the napkin. Figuring out where I want to put the sentiment, and I flip it up, and then I flip the other side. And that's how I prevent most of the wrinkles from happening. I'm gluing this down first because I want the napkins to stay true white and bright. I don't want to distort the colors. And some of these backgrounds are going to get a little bit dark. Cut off the excess once it dries. Now I'm looking at the colors on there, and I'm deciding what colors I'm going to put in the background. What I'm applying now is white gesso, and I'm kind of dabbing it on. I want to get some painterly background texture on there. This is also blending if there's any excess around the napkin and softening the edges. The gesso is also giving some strength to the napkin or to the background paper. And yes, if you wanted to, you could use mixed media paper. But because I'm gluing it onto the composition cover, I didn't want to add more bulk. And then I'm applying a coat of gesso to all the backs. If I was doing this again and I'm doing assembly line, I would use my brayer and just put a coat of gesso on there. That'll give another interesting texture. Now it's time to colorize. And for this one, I want a teal. And what I'm mixing is phthalo blue or phthalo turquoise and I can't think of the yellow. It'll come to me. And I'm painting that on the back. And I am just globbing it on. I don't want this to be all one color. I love the multi-tones of it. This one, I'm adding gray with Prussian blue. And then I'm going into where the blue of the background was. I didn't cut around the angels because this is very abstract and very watercolor looking. But adding the gray tones it down. Again, I'm looking for that mottled look. I'm adding a little bit of detail to go by painting over top of the napkin image, making the whites brighter, extending the wings a little bit. I lost a little bit of that when I painted with the blue, but I love the end result. And nobody knows what the original was, so if the wings extend a little bit more, it looks right. There's the gray and Prussian blue. I'm also mixing in some white gesso. And while this is sped up, I really am going at a quick rate. This is not the time to be precise. For this one, I am using Hooker's Green and that gray and a little bit of the phthalo turquoise. I'm matching the color to the color that's in that Barney napkin, his scarf and his hat. I want them to read. Remember, this is the back of the notebook, but I want it to look like it belongs. This is the foliage cube, and I'm stamping kind of the evergreen bough on there. First with the hooker's green and then with some of that phthalo turquoise. That yellow that I used before is Naples yellow. This one is the Artist Loft brand. It is lighter. I prefer the Liquitex basic one, but here I wanted to go light, so that's why I chose it. Here I'm adding a light background. I really was unsure what color I wanted to put in the background, but I decided that I'm going to use the color that's in that fox. I needed some color, but I didn't want to do blue again because I had two that had blue kind of greenish. So I picked the color from the fox in there, and I'm using burnt sienna on top of that Naples yellow white gesso mix. And on the back, I go a little bit darker with a lot more burnt sienna and the Naples yellow. But I'm continuing with the very painterly, splotchy effect. That adds interest in a very, very easy way. And like I said at the beginning, if you don't want to make a composition book, this will fit. These napkins will fit on a 4x4 or 5x5 canvas. They will go on a 5x7 even. Here I'm stamping with script. That will look good on any of these. You want a stamp or a stencil that's smaller scale. Here I grabbed this star stencil from the Crafters Workshop. This is one of their streamline stencils or slimline stencils. And I'm stenciling with white gesso these stars. I didn't have small snowflakes, so I picked stars and I loved them. Loved it so much that I used the star stencil for another two of them. One of the things when you're doing for craft fairs, to minimize the time that it takes, especially with things with a lower price point, is to not be dragging out everything using the same stencil on a multitude of them. If I did another 3 of these, I may use another stencil. So there's some variation. For this one, I'm stenciling with white like I have with all the others, but then I come back in with some gold to add another layer. It just seemed right for those angels. This would make a great project to do with your friends, even with kids. You can have the papers and everything cut out, ready to go, and everybody can assemble make their own Christmas memory ornament. Splattering with gold all over. This is easier to do now than once it's glued on because then you don't want to splatter the black spine. I'm applying these to the front and the back with gel medium from the Crafters Workshop. And I'm using the bone folder to make sure that there's contact, or you can use a brayer, and I use both. I put a coat underneath and I put a coat on top. And then I'm gluing down the Christmas Memories sentiment as well. It says, love shared, memories made. When you're cutting those off, they're printed on tissue paper. You want to cut them with the paper behind it. That gives stability and makes it easier to cut. You want to make sure after you splatter that you give it a good time to dry before you go and put that on. It does take a little longer for that splatter to dry completely. I don't know how many times I've started gluing something down or rubbed it and made a mess. Now I'm adding color to the focal image. Remember, there's a coat of gel medium on here, and that seals the napkin in. And I'm doing a wash with the colors, and I'm just adding a little bit of color just to make that focal image pop a little bit more from the background. This is also a time that you can adjust the color if you wanted to. Make it a little bit more green or a little bit more blue. This also makes it look like the whole thing has been painted. Even painting over where there's white makes it pop all the more. Now I'm using the Ranger blending foam and black acrylic paint and edging around the front and the back. This gives a border around your covers and just finishes everything off really nicely. And because this is going to be handled, you want to make sure that everything is permanent on here. Nothing is going to be water activated or smudgeable. Give that a good dry. Now these, I punched the corners, I cut the corners with my We Are Memory Maker corner maker. And I'll put a link to that and all the products in the description box below in either Ninnysnapkins or Amazon. And I put the prompts there. You get the prompts, the labels for the front, and the explanation of how to use the memory book in this digital pack, along with the Christmas activity calendar activity. And I'll put a link to that video as well. I add some jute or ribbon. I open it to the middle and tie that in. Here are some close-ups of each book by itself. I hope you love them as much as I do. Which one is your favorite?